Hello, everyone, and welcome to panel number 3 for the Environmental Film Festival at Yale 2022. Here we have Eladio Fernandez, who is the star of Island Naturalist, John Wallace, who is featured as an activist in Shawnee Showdown, and Steve Taylor, who is the press secretary for Global Justice Ecology and is actively working to protect the Shawnee Forest. Anything you all want to further your introductions with the group?
Well, actually, I have a cameo in the film because I was one of the participants in the 1990 and 1991 blockade. So John Wallace and I go way back. So my role is sort of multifaceted. But yes, I am working with Global Justice Ecology Project and helping the film, but was also a participant in the blockade.
Wonderful. Yeah, I thought so. There's a lot of faces in Shawnee Showdown, as all of our festival attendees will see.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm the public outreach coordinator for Shawnee Forest Defense, a local grassroots environmental group, and I'm also on the Heartwood Forest Council, which is a network of local forest activists in the center of the U.S.
And then Eladio, do you want to tell us a little more about your work outside of the film?
Sure. For most of the time, I'm a conservation photographer for, I'm a member of IOCP, the International League of Conservation Photographers. But I'm also an advisor to an NGO called Fundación Propagás that works with environmental education. And I'm working a couple of projects with the Ministry of the Environment as well. So I do a little bit of everything, both photography and conservation as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So this whole panel brings together your work. The title is Coming Together, Citizen Activists and Communities Working for the Planet. And one thing that I noticed watching both Island Naturalist and Shawnee Showdown is that people were at the center. It was people that identified that something needed to be done and came together to do that. So for this panel, we decided to bring in the people that have done it and are still actively doing this important work, and ask you about your experience and tell us some stories and tell us what's next for you. So I want to start off with Shawnee Showdown and just ask Steve and John what it was like to be in that camp that you all set up to stop the logging. I'm sure it was probably a pretty intense environment, right?
Yeah,
John?
I think sorry, Steve. I think
go ahead.
That's a fair representation. We started off on day one and just decided to make ourselves as visible as we possibly could. There's a county road that goes by the gate to the Fairview timber sale, and we decided to erect a large parachute, a tent made out of an old parachute in the middle of the logging road. And so the main goal was to engage people. We had banners up and many people came by and wondered what was going on, and we filled them in. We had different petitions, different bits of information for them, let them know what was about to happen to this logged area. And that's where, we set up camp, and before we knew it, we were getting an incredible amount of local support. And following the local support, people bringing us food and donations and water and things, then we started getting the broader support and eventually national support. And so that was exciting to see people coming from around the country to help us out and to buoy our spirits.
I would like to follow up on that. What do I remember it being like? I remember being a lot younger. I, I remember people being very committed to the forest. And I remember people coming from a variety of perspectives. You know, I back then was an environmentalist, and even, you know, some of us, including John Wallace, would talk about global warming, biodiversity, and all these issues that we're still talking about today. And I think the situation is even more dire now. But what was interesting was that I think there was a sense of community there. There was a lot of local support. So you had a small group of environmentalists who said, we're going to make a stand. But then, you know, it became a broader community action. Um, I remember believing that we were doing something important, without really a clue as to how it would turn out. The eventual moratorium was fantastic. I would say that I would do it all over again. There were times when it's like, what are you doing? Is this going to work out? You know, and to tell the truth, you know, I mean, we all knew that there might be consequences. I mean, we had one person run over by a logging truck, and that not killed, but injured. But I mean, it's funny. I mean, I've had to file out paperwork for different jobs and mention, you know, have you ever been arrested? Yes, you know, here, and you know, and they say, what was that about? And I take the moment to say, well, that was. Do you know what even age silvicultural management is? Do you know what clear cutting is? But I remember it being a very important part of my life, but I think it was even more important from a community perspective. And I think that's what the film shows, is that how important it is to the community and how important that forest is to the community. And I hope we can do something to save it now moving forward.
Well, hey, I mean, depending on the job, the arrest story might help you out. I don't know, but I'm glad
It's helping me out in my current position.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you both brought up community and how the community rallied in to support your cause. I know in Island Naturalists, you go to multiple different communities, don't you, to go do the work. Did you have a similar experience with the community that was working with the hawk, or the, you know, community where you started the Magnolia Nursery? Did you experience these same sorts of things that Steve and John were talking about?
No, completely different. Because, you know, keep in mind, I live in the island of Hispaniola. You know, you have Dominican Republic and Haiti, two countries sharing the same island. Two very different cultures, two languages, two very distinct levels of education, two very different economies. And when we went to Haiti, we had to adjust our narrative. You know, why is preserving these, you know, this fragment of 2 square kilometers important? For us, it's the magnolia. For example, another one of the Haiti National Trust members is reptiles and amphibians. But how do we communicate that to the people who live there, who are in a very basic living situation, and, you know, in a very high level of poverty, living off the land? You know, they're clear cutting, you know, because they need to make charcoal to live and sell it down, you know, in the town below. So, you know, our narrative, we had to adjust it to something they would understand, which is water. So, you know, why are we saving this 2 square kilometer fragment of forest where the magnolia is? Because it produces water. If you have water, you can irrigate your crops down the mountain. You know, you have drinking water, you know, during drought periods and all that. So you know, they were very curious at the beginning why we were so interested in one particular tree that had no value to them, you know. And so we had to, like I said, adjust this narrative to explain it to them. And for the hawk, you know, the community, we've been working in Los Limones in Dominican Republic, which is that community where the hawks occur naturally, for 20 years. So it's taking a long time. to understand what we're interested in and not them. That's the initial interest. Our initial interest was the bird. Now we're doing community development. We're just starting an aquaponic a project for them, with them, so they're going to form a cooperative and then try some other form of more sustainable agriculture rather than destroying the hogs, habitat. So with every single community where each one of these stories in Island Naturalist happens, and you have to adjust to that particular situation. And I'd love to have, the support that you all had, during your protest, but here people hear about these things through social media. Social media plays a very important role in activism now, and they respond emotionally, but they don't necessarily understand why it's important to save a particular thing. They just know it's important. So so the people will rally behind you, not necessarily with all the facts, but with emotion. And in the Dominican Republic, I would say the activist community is very active, to use the same word. But contrary to other islands, where I see the activism as much more toned down and not as participating in voicing their opinions on a daily basis.
If Eladio, I just wanted to mention to you that your hawk is actually named after a ornithologist that came from Illinois. We are in the state of Illinois, in the center of the country, and Robert Ridgway is. I assume he discovered the hawk. I'm not sure, or named it.
I'm not sure he discovered the hawk, but someone named it after him for sure. So yes. So yes, it's funny how all these things interlace with each other.
I would like to say, yes, the interconnectedness and Global Justice Ecology Project is an international organization focused on social justice, environment, and the issue of community. I mean, sometimes there's these unintended consequences too with efforts. For example, the RED program, reduction in emissions from deforestation, will impact indigenous communities who know how to take care of their local forests too, right? So, I mean, you can't just treat the environment as an isolated issue. I mean, this issue of community is, I mean, we all want to protect species. We all want to protect forests. We all want to reduce global warming, but things are interconnected, and we have to look at how local and indigenous cultures are impacted as well. So I think that was a very interesting aspect of what you're talking about there.
Yes, we can't do any conservation, as you well know, without the people who have a direct impact on. And you have to partner up, you have to explain, you have to sell the reason why, but you also have to find alternative sources of income for them. The problem is not only let's grow this forest, let's protect these trees. It's how can we change our lives for better? And because you're a part of this project now, and so signing up for one of these, it may seem like a very simple thing in the beginning, but it's a very long-term commitment. In terms of you have to be serious, and you have to stick through trying to find solutions for some of the people who live there, and obviously protecting something is going to affect someone who lives directly next to it. So I sometimes feel bad because I feel like a visitor. I'm from I don't live in this community. I don't, but I'm more concerned about protecting the resource than they are, but that's because they don't understand it yet. So and sometimes we get blamed for being outsiders and not necessarily being directly involved or, with the resource, the forest, or the community.
Yeah, that's one of the big challenges of environmental work generally. I mean, even students at our school, at the Yale School of the Environment, there's all these opportunities to go abroad and do conservation work elsewhere, but you really need to be aware of the communities that you're going into. And I think one thing that I picked out from all of you talking is that it seems that clear cutting generally is bad for communities, no matter where they exist, for multiple reasons. The forest provides water, so it's just the sell. It's the tact that you take in making that case to communities. And what communication tactics or strategies or principles do you use when you talk to people about conservation, whether they're in the community that needs conserving or elsewhere out in the world soliciting support? What's been successful for all of you?
For me, it's trying to find a commonality, and I think we've been talking about that here. People have connections to the natural environment and don't even realize it. And for instance, I've spoken to loggers, but the same loggers didn't understand the fact that the United States Forest Service was logging our public land at below cost while selling the timber below cost. They thought that was unreasonable. And most loggers don't really like to clear cut. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to loggers and they said, if we clear cut a place, I'll never come back in my lifetime and cut a tree on it. And it's self-defeating in many ways. And so we have to be able to bridge those gaps and pull people in. And some people we found just didn't care about the environment, but cared about the fact that the government was wasting money. It's an interesting thing. And then I'll speak to a hunter that wants to make sure that he has good areas to hunt and thinks that we don't have anything in common. And without good habitat, he's not going to be able to hunt for very long, he or she. So everything is related, as Steve said, and as Eladio had also indicated. And we have to be able to find a way to reach them and use different tools. One of our best tools is always a petition. You can actually, once somebody takes the time to read a statement and sign their name to it, usually they're open to a discussion, and that's a good way to start that process. But there's many different ways. And then there's some people that shocking news coverage, people buried up to their necks in the middle of a logging road, gets their attention. I once heard the group Earth First described as the alarm clock for the environmental movement, and it's often used to wake people up to the crises that we're facing, and that serves a role. Sometimes that's appropriate, and sometimes it's not. You have to judge your community and what is going on around you before you take those steps.
Well, John, I don't know. I'm sure you remember this. So, I mean, you invoked the name Earth First. So it's interesting in the movie Shawnee Showdown. That's mentioned often, and there were people from St. Louis involved in the Shawnee, which is a neighboring state. There were some Earth Firsters, and I myself was considering going to California for Redwood Summer, which was in 1990. So it was a parallel track. You had the Shawnee encampment going on, and that was going to be happening at the same time as Redwood Summer. And the reason why I mentioned that is because both of those issues were dealing with clear cutting. Shawnee was very successful because of the overall community support. I mean, that forest is so important to local people. In California, Judy Berry was reaching out to loggers and actually starting to unionize loggers, which is one reason why it's thought that maybe she was targeted. And, you know, I don't know if you all know the Judy Berry story, but you could check it out easily. You know, there was an assassination attempt on Judy Berry's life, and you know, consequentially, there was a lawsuit against the FBI where Judy Berry and an associate of hers won $4.4 million for their civil rights having been violated. But they were working very, very closely with the logging community because clear cutting was not good for the loggers. And you had these large multinationals coming in and doing that. So when you ask what really helped with the organizing, it was community in both cases. I would also like to say, when it comes to outreach, I think these films are doing a pretty good job for the issues at hand. I think going forward for forests, I mean, we're dealing with climate change. We're dealing with catastrophic climate change. There are proposals, all sorts of strange proposals to reduce the amount of sunlight that reaches the earth by putting this reflective material into the atmosphere. People want to genetically engineer trees so they grow faster and absorb more carbon. We have these old growth forests. As John Wallace said in a recent interview, there's this thing that's great at capturing and sequestering carbon, and it does it for free. It's forests. How on one hand can we be clear cutting these forests and then be worried about you know, climate change and, oh wow, we better engineer a better tree that can capture more carbon? Makes no sense. I mean, what you see there, I think, I don't know, I'm somewhat cynical. Maybe there's a profit motive in having to create a new tree to replace our old growth forests. But I think moving forward, global warming, climate change, that's a natural, I mean, you got to love our forests. You got to respect our forests. I mean, that's the big state. And I will say this, back in 1990, when John and I were on the logging road and things were going on in Redwood Summer, people were talking about climate change and how if we didn't do something soon, you know, it's going to be the extinction of humankind. I mean, the Earth's going to survive. It's us that's going away. But look, what has happened? I mean, it's you can get a little jaundiced about it, but I think that we're seeing this come together where we're supporting old growth forests and fighting climate change. It may be coming together. Hopefully, I mean, there's hope, right?
Yeah. So, Eladio, what I wanted to ask you is the context of a lot of forests in the United States. We're kind of fighting the government in many ways. It's, you know, a government sanctioned thing, which, you know, the enemy is clear, right? Which is helpful, but it's also very powerful, right? The U.S. Forest Service, the federal government. In the case of Hispaniola, it seems that a lack of understanding is what you're working against for the most part. I mean, it could be some government intervention too, but you know, it's a very different thing that you need to work on. Would you agree with that, do you think?
Yes, like you said, there's also a government issue, but for example, Haiti's energy matrix is charcoal. So you have 11 million people, and maybe 90% of that 11 million people cooking 3 times a day with charcoal. They don't have access to liquid petroleum gas or any other cooking method. There are people going there and bringing like sun ovens and all these other, new technology, so they don't they use less charcoal and that kind of thing. But you know, if you really want to address the environmental issue in Haiti, there has to be international intervention with regards to changing the matrix of Haiti, the energy matrix. In Dominican Republic, we had a government and a president many decades ago or years ago, and he understood the value of subsidizing liquid petroleum gas for cooking. You know, there was a deforestation factor that would stop, you know, or at least slow down, you know, as people started to not have to go to the woods and cut down trees for making charcoal. And so, you know, the two countries are in two different situations in terms of their the energy matrix. But you know, the manuals for reforestation, no one's here yet using habitat restoration or, you know, need to be revised. And this was something that I was, you know, yelling on social media about over the past year. You know, we're still planting species from, you know, supposedly for reforestation programs from Australia, from Africa, from all these introduced species that are actually becoming a problem because we're doing so well here, and sometimes they respond really well to fire. You'd think like you can set fire to the thing and control that invasive species. No, that just triggers, you know, the seeds to germinate quicker. So, you know, we're having all these problems, and you have areas, for example, in the northern part of the Dominican Republic, where large tracts of what used to be cattle pastures are being turned to pine forests. And pine, but it's a monoculture. So, you know, and that's an area that goes through very long drought periods. And that's probably not the best thing you should be planting in that particular. And those areas, before they were cattle pastures, they were broadleaf forests. And so, you know, we change them, we cut them down, we clear cut them to make them cattle pastures. Now we're planting pine trees, but we're not restoring the habitat for water production. We have 22 million people in Dominican Republic and Haiti on the island of Hispaniola. This is the most populated island in the Caribbean by far. Cuba has a larger territory. They have 10 point something million people, half of what we have. Imagine the pressures on the natural resources, the national park system, 1/3 of the island, which is Haiti. You know, some people have different estimates, but you know, they've lost 99% of their primary forest. You know, and they still have some natural forests. They have other things. They've substituted forest with production, you know, like plantains and mango trees and all these other things that provide food, which they need. But no one is protecting natural forests. And in terms of an island and water production, that is just bad news. And so I've been, you know, even the Ministry of the Environment, I'm sad to say, has all these nurseries, and it's the species that they're producing sometimes are introduced species, because we're using the same reforestation manual from 35, 40, 50 years ago. So, you know, all these needs revision if we are to get out of this in good terms, because otherwise Dominican Republic and Haiti both are headed to become, you know, like completely denuded, dry, very dry places. Haiti, in terms of climate change, as Steve was saying, climate change is a real issue for us, because Haiti is right now number 3 in a list of 10 countries that are most vulnerable to climate change, and we're number 11. You know, we're 1 over 10, but you know, so, you know, the policies that these developed countries are not taking in terms of climate change, we are the ones who end up paying. And if we don't have the appropriate, you know, forestry um, strategy, we're going to get in big trouble. And no one seems to see this for some reason. It's incredible.
Yeah, I was so surprised watching your film for the first time to learn that 99% of the primary forest is gone. I think of all these Caribbean nations as, de facto rainforests, but to learn that that's not true on such a massive scale was really surprising. I think that's part of our, at least my blinders as an American, is that, you don't live in these other places, you don't see it happen. And it's not until you watch a film like yours that you realize what the problem is. So I think that I'm sure we could go on talking about the problematic nature for a while of these problems, but what's next? I know that Steve and John are doing a lot of work with the Shawnee to this day. So I'd love to hear about that. And then you too, Eladio, what do you think is the pathway forward to reforming these forestry practices?
So one of the things that as a citizen of this planet, as well as the United States, that is real important to me is the fact that we on this in the United States represent, I believe it's 4% of the world's population, but generate 25% of the world's carbon, which is so quickly contributing to this climate change issue. And we have, I was amazed. We have national forests, we have national parks, we have wildlife refuges, state refuges and parks, but we don't have a single that I know of, a single climate change preserve in this country. And that's, in my opinion, a climate change preserve is a forest that is primary purpose is to capture carbon and the best way for us to do that is to not be disturbed at all. So much of the carbon in a forest is, there's quite a bit of carbon in the tree itself, the structure of the tree, but it's in well-established forests, it's really, most of it is held in the ground. When that ground is disturbed, carbon just escapes for years following timber cutting and timber harvesting, and that creates a carbon source. Even though younger trees actually grow faster and are more efficient at sequestering carbon, they just don't have the mass. They don't have the volume that mature forests have to actually really absorb more carbon than is released, because all living organisms and communities give off carbon as well as sequester it. Well, forests do the best job. Mature forests do the best job of holding it, storing it, sequestering it, and storing it in the ground. And so what we are proposing, and the Shawnee is just a small national forest as national forests are concerned. It's 289,000 acres in southern Illinois, but my hope is we can create the Shawnee National Park and Climate Change Preserve, and then nearby national forests will do the same. We can start a program to really establish our public land is the biggest and the best forest that we have in the country, and private land, most of the forests get logged pretty regularly. In Illinois, private land changes hands. I believe it's once every 12 years. So oftentimes when someone owns the forested ground, right before they sell it, they log off the trees so they can get as much out of it, liquidate as much as they can off a piece of land. And so that's why we really need to put effort into protecting our public forests for wildlife, but also for climate change, for the overall good of climate change. Now, that's not going to do it all. We have to reduce our emissions without question. We have to make sacrifices. That's something that's going to be tough because we've learned to really like burning carbon. We really like to use fossil fuels in this country, and we have to make some sacrifices. And I understand what you said, Eladio, as far as how climate change impacts your the Caribbean and your nation so significantly, but it's starting to hit here too. We had and we live in an area where tornadoes are common, storms that can often be deadly. Usually they just happen in the spring. Well, in the last few years, they've been happening in December, in February, and in our winter months, which is really a problem. And most climate experts will agree it's a result of climate change. Flooding is becoming a common occurrence. We're having 100-year floods every 10 years. And so we're starting to feel that impact. And frankly, we need we need tropical forests. We need tropical ecosystems. We need to protect our oceans as well. And we're really going to have to make some changes. And I'm hoping that we can start with this small step to get people to start thinking and start establishing true climate preserves for the overall benefit of all, and not just for a few.
Well, Global Justice Ecology Project is fully supportive of the effort to move the Shawnee National Forest from the Department of Agriculture, the Forest Service, to be a climate preserve, and that is a reasonable thing to do. Global Justice Ecology Project is fully supportive of that. I personally, as a former encampment participant, am definitely for that. I love old growth forests for biodiversity, for carbon capture and sequestration. But when it comes to what do we do, I think on a broader analysis or looking at it from a little bit further back, we have to look at the climate debt that's owed to the global South. I mean, how we've been kind of pushing towards a lot of these carbon offsets, which are bookkeeping methods, which may or may not work, and often have been shown to be ineffectual. Are these technologies that we're going to pull carbon out of the air, and the amount of carbon that's actually being projected to be pulled out of the air is very, very little. What's driving this, I think, is this sense of we're going to use technology to save us from ourselves when we want to continue to denude the earth, to exploit it. We have to look at some fundamental questions about how, well, some people talk about system change. I mean, either we're going to be part of system change or it's going to happen to us. That's just a fact. I mean, we cannot keep going on as we are. It is going to collapse. Now, some people think we're going to be able to do geoengineering or have a techno fix. And there's a lot of false solutions being pushed. At least that's a focus of Global Justice Ecology Project is the false solutions. Strange offsets, geoengineering, a look at a new green revolutions, and we know that you can end up disturbing local environments by bringing in species which are not appropriate. So I think we need to look at the global picture. Locally, with the Shawnee National Forest, there's nothing better. Why not make it a climate preserve? I mean, it's a great message. I mean, our forests should all be preserved. But that's what Global Justice Ecology Project has to say about it.
Yeah, great. I know you've talked about it a little bit, Eladio, but It seems that changing the availability of cooking, heating methods would go the furthest for the forests in Hispaniola. Is there anything else, and what's being done on that front, and how could an audience member or foreign government help with that? You've touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to hear more.
It's really complicated. I mean, you could have a company, for example, Fundación Propagas, a company the NGO I work for, stems from a liquid petroleum gas distributing enterprise. So, what's to stop them from going to Haiti? Well, if you're in one country and someone from another country is coming in to set up business, and you're not going to be, making that business yourself, then if you have the influences, you're going to try to prevent that from happening. So, this is also what happens. But maybe, if it comes from outside, UN type situation where they decide, let's come together with the Haitian government, and maybe this is one of the solutions that we can figure out. Because keep in mind, if there is no forest left in, or a big chunk of forest of Haiti is gone, where do you think the charcoal is coming from? It's coming from the Dominican Republic. And people are making money at the border. I'm talking about, military people who are taxing. There was a study that more or less figured out, the whole commercial chain of charcoal from the point of origin to where it reaches the city of Port-au-Prince, which is where the majority of the population of Haiti. And it's impressive how the taxation and the margins get adding up, every time it exchanges hands and then reaches its final destination. So, there's a lot of people making money from that. And so you're coming in and proposing to change the whole system. And it's basically all those people are going to boycott, whatever you propose and whatever you're trying to start. So, I wish I had a black and white, response to that question, but I don't. And it's really difficult. There's so many variables and so many people involved in a process like that. It's almost frustrating because you don't see light at the end of the tunnel, and you don't know if it's ever you're ever gonna be able to accomplish something so big, but so important, for the survival of a country like Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Just so you know, we're on our way to become Haiti. We're just a little bit behind, but everything we're doing is we're taking all the same steps they took historically to get to where they are, and we're headed that way. And there's a bunch of us trying to open eyes of people, but it's very difficult. And also, we've been analyzing here, from the point of view of technology, of the importance, the science, but there's a kind of I don't want to sound flaky now, but there's a holistic aspect. I mean, when you come before a tree that's 500 years old, it's almost disrespectful to cut it down. I mean, that organism has been around more than you have. What right do you have to go there and end his life for your own gain, not even for the community's gain? So that should also be part of the equation when you take decisions. It's just we never think about it that way for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that came to mind as you were speaking about how there's no one clear-cut decision, way to go about doing this is, I mean, you've got hundreds of critically endangered magnolia trees in a nursery. So at the end of the day, what needs to happen is more trees need to grow. Biodiversity needs to be protected. So Yeah, I mean, I think all of us that do environmental work, sometimes we're grasping at straws and just saying, well, what do we do next? But you can always do something. And who knows if one of those trees that you're growing in that nursery might be 500 years old someday. It could be that next tree.
Yeah,
So
the other thing is, I didn't have any experience, with seeing something from zero to where it is now in terms of germinating seeds, a nursery, and it's really simple. It's surprisingly very easy. I came to the conclusion that we have critically endangered plant species because we want to, because some might have complicated aspects to their biology and reproductive cycles or whatever, but for the most part, I think we're just not putting in those nurseries. We're not making the effort for those particular species, for the management of those particular species. And so our experience there has been great. Now we have, just so you know, I was there like 3 weeks ago in Haiti. I went back after 2.5 years. And the photos of the nursery are impressive. We have 4 feet tall magnolia plants. We're now growing all these other species that are key also, because we don't want to do a monoculture of magnolia either. We want to have a restoration program with different species, anywhere from high canopy, medium canopy, bushes, more herbaceous species, all combined in these plots. So we're at that step now. We're making now plots where we're starting to plant that were used to be agricultural plots. So it's impressive. It's impressive to see in such a short period that you can actually make a difference.
yeah, I really loved what you said about it being simple. I've thought about this a lot too. I can look up on the internet the germination requirements of almost any plant. And if you just follow those requirements, you can get anything to sprout up and, put it anywhere out in the wide world. So, you don't need a lot of technology. You don't even need anyone's permission to do that. Most of the time, you could just put something somewhere. No one's going to, say, well, how did that tree get here? Trees just grow. So one thing I want to end with, and I think I'm most curious about this when I ask people who do environmental work. What inspires you to continue doing this? Or who has inspired you in the past? Or just what's that driving force behind each of your work?
Well, for myself, I think I just have to say the beauty of the natural world. We live in a temperate climate, and right now the spring migrants are coming back, the birds, and for the first time I had tree swallows in my yard today, and what beautiful birds, what beautiful creatures. And it's reassuring to know that nature is coming back. They're looking for a place to build their nest, and nature is going to continue to thrive, and that is, that's an incredible inspiration for me. And a good friend of mine that I work with to this day has always said one of the great things about environmental work is you get to work with your heroes. And I've worked with so many people that inspire me, that sacrifice, that are giving of themselves for a greater cause. And I just hope that when I'm gone, that somebody actually thinks that, or that I did the same. You know what I mean? It's reassuring. So we have to get that inspiration out of what we do, or it's like fighting a disease that we can't conquer, and we need to have hope. And one of the things that hit me out of all of the films on this panel Ross, was a quote by the young woman, and I cannot remember her name, in Panatau, a charred wetland. And her comment was, as she rescued these burnt animals from these disastrous fires, she said, "Later is too late." And I just, it is time for drastic action. We need to start making change, and I certainly hope we can.
Well, Eladio, Ross, it's been great meeting and being on the panel with you. John, I've met you before. We've known each other for, well, now going on 30 years. Inspiration, I mean, I grew up camping and boating, and I mean, every weekend with my father. I think I was telling John about this last night in a phone call. I grew up in that, and I grew up in an area where there wasn't a lot. And then I saw the development come in and destroy what we had. So there's a basic, I guess, appreciation for nature itself. I get nervous when we start losing species. I get nervous when we start removing the natural world. It's like we're losing that other than humanness of the experience. We're replacing nature with visions of ourselves. I mean, right now there's a proposal to replace the American chestnut with a genetic version. We're going to alter it, so it can do better and maybe avoid the blight. And that's uncertain whether it will be able to or not. But to me, we're losing that otherness. We're losing wilderness. And wilderness is more than just something where things live that can kill you. Someone defined it once. It's that other than we are, that represents, billions of years of coevolution, right? We're going to replace it with things that we think are better. And as Eladio said, it's simple. Just grow the stuff. I mean, we're losing it in essence because we want to. And I thought that was a very powerful statement. And I've also heard, I mean, it can get dire for people who are in the trenches year after year, and then sometimes decades after decades. But I heard someone say, there is a joy in the work too. So we have to remember that we get to meet people, and I enjoy meeting Eladio and Ross on this panel. And thank you for the hard work all of you do.
I agree with John that there's a sense of urgency, and I don't want everybody to leave this panel, who's watching, with a sense of a dire sense of the end of the world or something. But it doesn't have to be. Think about context. Where you are is where you can make a difference. And since this is a university-based film festival, think about at the end of your studies, maybe taking a year off and planting 500,000 trees, native endemic trees. If everybody did that, if I would have done that, I'm 55. I would have been sitting under the shade of a whole forest, that I might have contributed to planting. So, you want to see your trees big, start early, because, Steve, John, and I might not see, anything we're planting now in the future, but we're planting for you guys and for our kids and for our grandchildren, everybody who's coming down the line. But do give that a consideration, because, you'll get to see the fruits of your labor, later on in life. And maybe 500,000 trees sounds like a lot, but probably it's not enough. So I'd like to close with that. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, that was really, really beautiful. I'll take you up on it. I've always loved planting trees, but one thing that came to mind is the fall before you start planting, you've got to get a whole bunch of acorns if you're planting oak trees or whatever. And in order to have acorns, you need forests. So all the work kind of comes together, but it was such a pleasure having you all on this panel. Thank you so much for coming. And I think those that watch it will get a lot out of it. And I certainly learned so much about both of the regions that you all work in. And I'm sure that all over the world, there's people just like all of you doing similar work like this. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Ross. We're fortunate to have this environmental film festival.
Thank you, filmmakers.
Yes.
Yes.
And thank you to all the filmmakers, of course.
Absolutely.
Without all of you, this would not be possible.
Thumbs up to Cade Bursell for Shawnee Showdown. I have to mention her name. She's done a lot.
And Eladio with the camera too.
Oh, well, that goes without saying.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.